Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Uruj Nusrat and I will be your host for today at the Happy Strong Family podcast, live from Masjid Darul Imam in Markham. Um, Jazakallah khair for all the audience for joining us today. We have a very special guest, Sister Iman, mashallah, with us today, and she'll be talking about a topic that, in my opinion, is often overlooked. Sister Iban, before we get into the topic, I'd like to introduce her to you. Mashallah, she is an author, a researcher in Islamic and Prophetic Medicine. She's also look at wellness from a combination perspective from Islamic and herbal medicine, and she's able to help multiple people with this unique combination restore their health. Um, Sister Iman, thank you for joining us and welcome back to the show.
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. How are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well, thank you.
Are you ready for Ramadan?
Yes, I think inshallah. I'm looking forward to it. MashaAllah. So today's topic is a bit of a different topic, in my opinion, really focusing on Islam from a healing perspective and the benefit of healing,
Yes.
right? And mashallah, alhamdulillah, Ramadan is around the corner. And when I think of Ramadan, when I think of benefit of fasting, um, I'm looking at it from a spiritual journey perspective,
Right.
right? I'm looking at it from how do I get an opportunity to embrace self discipline? How do I nurture my mind, my body, my soul,
Right.
connect with Allah, and also be able to provide charity to others in a way that's compassionate to me, to show mercy to others, right? And I see benefits from a physical and a mental health perspective. Where does healing fit in all of this? And before we get into the how of healing, can you focus on what is healing benefit of fasting? Can you tell us about that, please?
So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Ramadan is for us to attain taqwa. And so, the first form of healing that we get from Ramadan is developing taqwa. And there's a huge correlation between our stomachs being full and our desires being fulfilled and our awareness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that we heal, we don't just heal physically, we heal spiritually. And by removing the sustenance that we depend on, by feeling hunger and thirst and abstaining from intimacy with our spouses, in that, removing all of these desires, there's an awareness that wakes up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You start to become aware. You don't touch food in Ramadan, you don't eat because you know that Allah's watching and He's told you not to do it. So this temporary of making food forbidden or drink forbidden in Ramadan starts to discipline the nafs. It starts to wake you up to notice, like, okay, what am I doing? How do I change my perception of food? How do I change my perception of health? So the healing has to begin with the spiritual self first. So when you wake up to the when you wake up that taqwa internally, that awareness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it makes it easier for you to then become aware of other things. You know, Ramadan is incredible because people in Ramadan can give up smoking, they can give up haram relationships. A lot of people will give up swearing, or they'll give up drinking alcohol. People will do a lot in the month of Ramadan. That taqwa to Allah, that fear and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala develops so much more in Ramadan. It's a month of self-discipline, self-mastery. And the first aspect of it is going to be spiritual. But then what we do with our Sahur and Iftar and the hours that we're allowed to eat is going to affect whether or not we heal physically in Ramadan as well. So in its natural form, fasting purifies the body, purifies the soul. It removes toxins physically. It regenerates like growth hormones. Like so many things. Your gut flora is going to be rebalanced. Things that are off balance are going to be cleansed. Toxins that are remaining in your body are going to be removed. It's a huge 30-day detoxification. So think of your body like this. If you had a house for 11 months that you didn't touch, and dust accumulated, and rodents and insects started to infest the house, and no one's mopped or dusted or cleaned, and it's just a huge mess. Now you're going to go in and you have to clean all of this up. That's what Ramadan does. We neglect our soul, we neglect our body for 11 months of the year. Unless you're fasting every month, the 3 days or the Mondays and Thursdays, typically most people will just neglect their body and their soul for these 11 months and only really wake up again to it in Ramadan. So there's huge potential to go in there and do a deep clean. People restore their health a lot in Ramadan, but they can also destroy it. It just depends on what you do with food.
Mm, nice. So then, how can we benefit or maximize this healing?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we have to do is we always have to go back to the Quran and Sunnah.
Hmm.
I actually brought a display of the stomach, okay? There's a
Nice.
hadith that says that the human being doesn't feel anything worse than their stomach.
Mhm.
A few morsels are enough to suffice him, but if he must eat, then a third for food, a third for air, and a third for drink. Now, if you actually look at the stomach,
Mhm.
this is actually 1.5 times bigger than your real stomach. Your real stomach is even smaller, so about the size of your fist, and it sits
Mhm.
right there in between your ribs. What happens is that these folds, when we eat, they get instructions to expand so that they can start digesting the food. But the maximum size of the stomach is about a liter. How big is that bottle? Is that a liter?
Yes, a little bit
Maybe
less.
750.
750,
Maybe
yes.
750. So that's
Mhm.
3 cups.
Okay.
So your stomach at maximum capacity is slightly bigger than that, a liter to a liter point 5.
Okay.
Now, if the hadith says only a third for food and a third for drink and a third for air, how much can you possibly fill in here?
Not a
And I
lot.
mean, if you look at the 9-inch plates that we're usually filling or the repeat dishes that we have,
The common plates
yes, and
that we
if you're
have.
eating until you're full to the rim,
Hmm.
you're actually harming your body. You're not nourishing your body.
Mm,
So there's this concept called the law of diminishing return.
okay.
And what it means is that if you do the same thing, but you just do more of it, you're not going to get um, double the benefit. So, for instance, if I eat 1 cup of food, I'm going to extract the nutrients. If I eat 3 cups of food, I'm not going to extract 3 times the nutrients.
Oh, I see.
That's the
Okay.
law of diminishing return. Just by increasing the quantity doesn't mean you increase how much you absorb. Again, think of your laundry machine. If
Hmm.
you put half the load in, it washes, everything's cleaned. If you stuff it to the rim, the law of
Mm,
diminishing return says just because you stuffed it with more doesn't mean it's going to clean it more,
right.
right? So we have to look at our stomach in the same way, is that we have to give our stomach a little bit at a time. The sunnah is to eat a third. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, he says, Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu. So he says, eat and drink. Now, the English translation usually says, and do not waste. But that's
Mm,
not the correct word, because israf in Arabic actually means consuming what's halal beyond what's good for you. So if you're
mm,
consuming food beyond what's good for you, this is now israf.
okay.
Now, most people are really detached from their body. They're unaware of how much food is good for them. They're unaware
Hmm.
of which foods to combine together. There's a lot of misinformation on social media. You know,
Hmm.
people will tell you, wake up for suhoor, have 3 cups of water, have a high protein breakfast so you could sustain yourself throughout the day. But the thing is that you're not, your body, in order for it to heal, it has to go into starvation mode. It has
Okay.
to go into dehydration. So
Okay.
you need to dehydrate and you need to starve for that ketosis to kick in. And when that ketosis kicks in, this is when your body actually starts to cleanse itself and heal.
Hmm.
Because your body can't do two things at the same time. It can't heal and it can't digest.
Right.
So if you're
Okay.
eating a large breakfast at suhoor and
Hmm.
it takes 4 to 6 hours to leave your stomach, depending on what you ate, then you're only beginning to have the healing as of the 6 hours. Once it's empty, now you count 12 hours from the empty point.
Okay.
After 12 hours of your stomach being empty, now you're hitting like detoxification.
Oh,
So
okay.
it takes a long time. And the thing is usually if we are doing a 12-hour or 16-hour, 18-hour fast, it's towards the end of the fast that the body is really purifying
Okay.
because it has to feel dehydrated. Now, we sabotage this by the way we eat at suhoor.
Right.
So if you have a really heavy breakfast at suhoor, you're actually going to get thirstier because your body needs water to break
Mm,
down what you ate. So
okay.
if you find that in Ramadan you're constantly thirsty, constantly thirsty, constantly thirsty, it's not because you've been fasting all day and you're dehydrated. It's because you're eating heavy things like fried foods, heavy meats, overeating, that your stomach just wants to wash it out. So
Okay.
this demand for more water isn't from dehydration; it's because it's unable to process the food that you've given it.
So what about like from the other perspective, people who actually miss suhoor or don't really have anything suhoor because they know, I'll have something heavy for iftar, for example. Does that have any negative impact?
Yes,
Okay.
because so there's two extremes. You can either overfeed it or you could starve it for way too long. What happens is that we have a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad SAW said, take suhoor, because the best of suhoor is dates. So the best thing you can eat for suhoor is dates, and take suhoor even if it's just a sip of water. So just before you get up for Salatul Fajr, if you're unable to eat, make sure you just have a sip of water, because that fulfills the hadith of taking suhoor. And what that does is that our stomach, so when we eat, there's this thing called peristalsis that moves everything through our system.
Right.
So you chew food, you swallow it, it starts to squeeze through your stomach and then squeeze through your intestines.
Right.
If you don't do that, your entire digestive tract stops. So if your last meal is the night before at 9 o'clock and you're not eating again until the next day at 8 o'clock, then you've got 23 hours of your stomach completely stopping. So now this can cause constipation. This can make it difficult to digest the next meal. By having that sip of water or date at suhoor time, you keep the engine running a little bit longer. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Very nice. Um, so I guess if you can talk about some of the habits that can sabotage our healing for fasting.
So the biggest things that we do to sabotage our healing is that we focus only on food. So we enter Ramadan, and I see this online. People are already prepping for Ramadan. They're shredding cheeses and they're freezing samosas and they've made the kebabs.
Guilty.
Everything's in the fridge. They have a freezer in their house just dedicated to Ramadan feasts, right? And so the problem is that our focus is just on food. Our focus is just on satisfying the nafs, and that's not really the purpose of Ramadan. The Ramadan is the month of Qur'an, right? And so I always say, okay, why don't you read the Qur'an this month and search all the ayat that talk about food? Just as you read it, pay attention to anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions with food. You're going to find that every single juz of the Qur'an talks about our nourishment. Every single juz has ayat that talk about our nourishment. You're going to find over 100 ayat that talk about food, drink, plants, animals, anything that we use as provision. We are so detached from our food, how our food grows, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses food in the Quran to connect us back to Him. So He actually uses food to prove His existence, to call us back to Tawheed. And the thing is that when you're sufficed, you forget that He is your provider. When people are so focused on eating, they forget that the nourishment actually comes from Allah. They forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to put barakah. I mean, there's a hadith that says that you could drink water, Zamzam water, and it is for whatever you intend it for. Meaning, if you don't have food and you drink Zamzam water and you engage your heart to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to turn this into nourishment for my body, even though there's no calories, even though there's no fats or carbs or proteins in it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to sustain me with that water.
MashaAllah.
But people don't engage their heart. People actually look at what they can see and measure, like calories, fats, proteins, and they don't think about the unseen component of nourishment, which is it comes from Allah.
Right. I think it's also the cultural too, right? Like you having this iftar dawats at home because you want to connect with people. You're gonna have all these different type of food to present to your guest, and it's very hard to get away from that as well. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen for people to really learn the right way of eating from an Islamic perspective. There's not a lot of knowledge out there, easy knowledge that people can digest. I think that's really the missing key, especially when I am searching for things like that on the internet.
So the thing is if you enter, like I have people who come over to my house as dinner guests, okay? And yes, we all want to honor our guests. Sometimes you want to make a variety for them to eat. But I also come from the mindset that this is an opportunity for da'wah. This is an opportunity for me to share with them the sunnahs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, talking to them about why we break our fast with dates, why we have a sip of water, why we eat things like dareed, which is, one of the favorite meals of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'll cook meals that might be prophetic. I'll make things like sawiq, which is like a date ball. So at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they used to make a dish if they had no food. So their iftar would be sawiq, which would be dates and a flour like semolina or barley. So it's a mixture of grain with dates, and it's usually made like just a flat portion, and people just dip in and take a piece and eat, and that would be their meal. That would be their iftar. Now, can you imagine you just serving your guests that?
Oh, no.
But imagine if you actually set up a table that had sawiq and that had dareed and that had nabid, and you serve the table of just prophetic dishes that you could offer your guests. Then it changes the iftar to discussing more of the sunnah, more connecting people back more to Allah and how the Prophet Muhammad used to eat, and using it as an opportunity to educate and not using it as an opportunity to feed their nafs, because the nafs is insatiable. And we know that no matter how many foods you make, how many guests you honor, there's always going to be somebody who's not pleased with what you presented. So if we aim to please Allah, we'll never be disappointed. If we aim to please people, you're going to be at a loss,
Of course.
right? And it's not to say we're not honoring the guest. You're still honoring the guest. You're still
Okay.
feeding them. But we have to allow ourselves to break free first.
Exactly.
We can't expect others
Start
to break
from
us free.
us.
Right.
Correct.
So you have to lead by example.
Mhm. I think that's very difficult. So, do you have on your website? Do you talk about these kind of recipes that people can incorporate in their, in their meals?
So I have a book called The Ramadan Remedy that I
Okay.
wrote about 8 years ago.
Mhm.
I'm just in the process of creating the second edition.
Nice.
In this
mashallah.
in this edition, I'm going to have 7 suhoor ideas, recipes,
Mm.
and 7 iftar, as well as 7 drinks to sort of improve your digestive system throughout Ramadan. And in the book, it's like a detailed outline of how you should eat, how your stomach works, how to improve on the like healing process that Ramadan offers, like the fasting offers. So how to use Ramadan to heal, essentially, is the
Mhm.
premise of the book. And so yeah, if somebody wanted to have that information, they'd be able to download it.
Okay.
It's going to be available on my website through propheticmedicine.com/Ramadan.
And that will be available when?
So right now it's available for those who want to register for it. They'll
Okay.
they'll get to watch a free video,
Oh, nice.
and then after that they'll receive an email from me on the first day of Ramadan with the book.
Oh, jazakallah. It's very nice.
Wayaki.
Wow, subhanallah. And so, for healing perspective, going back to what about people who may have, let's say, diabetes, or people who have a cholesterol issue and other sorts of issues? Can they benefit from fasting? Does that provide any healing to them?
100%.
Okay.
Most people who have diabetes, cholesterol, high blood pressure, they have metabolic diseases, which means it's diseases from what you eat. So the premise is, like, the base is that disease developed because of improper eating.
I
So you
see.
can definitely heal that. Now, it's a lot more complicated when someone's been on diabetic medications for 20 years versus
Right.
someone who just became diabetic.
Okay.
So if it's early on in the game, it's a little bit easier. Once you're in it a long time, if they're allowed to fast, there are ways that you can fast and heal and benefit from it. You could eventually get off medications just by adjusting how you eat. So, I mean, food can either poison you or can either heal you. It just depends on the dose, right? I mean, people walk around saying, oh, food is medicine, food is medicine, food is medicine. Yes, but that's not completely true, because it always depends on the dose. Too much food can turn into poison.
Okay. And so obviously during Ramadan we are having two meals, right? We're having our suhoor and we're having an iftar. Now going back outside of Ramadan, should we continue two meals or is it three meals that's better? What's your take on that?
So first of all, there's a lot of people who are not having 2 meals; they're having 4
Or yeah.
or 3. There's like there's the iftar, there's the post tarawih, then there's before I go to sleep, and then there's before. So some people are using the 6 to 8 hour window in the evening that they're allowed to eat to maximize on eating because they
What they
feel
missed.
that. But there's an issue with that, and I like to give examples because I think it's easier for someone to understand it.
Okay.
If your employer said to you, Urush, take the month off, okay? I don't need you to come in 9 to 5. I'm going to give you a break. Just log in for a few hours at night. But he saves everything that didn't get done in the day for you to finish in those few hours at night. Does that feel like you got a vacation?
Oh no. Not at all.
So he, instead of you working 10 hours, 12 hours
Worse.
that day, he's given you a window of 6 hours to
Mhm.
complete 12 hours worth of work. This is the same thing we do when we fast, is that instead of allowing our body to take the vacation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives your digestive system a break because it cannot heal if it's digesting food.
Mm.
So he says, give it a break, let your liver heal, let your intestines heal, let your gut flora rebuild. All of this change that's forced upon us through the month of Ramadan is an opportunity to rebuild our health. Like damaged cells get removed.
Right.
Like there's so much internal cleaning that happens, but if your stomach is constantly digesting at night and it's overburdened, then in the day it's still trying to clean up what you did the night before. So now it doesn't even have time to clean up what you did 11 months worth of improper eating. Now you've just added to it in the month of Ramadan. So a light suhoor, a light breakfast. I mean, and Apples and peanut butter could be a breakfast, okay? Just one
Hmm.
apple and a tablespoon of peanut butter, that is breakfast. You can have dates and cucumber, that's breakfast. You can have sourdough bread with grass-fed butter, that's breakfast.
Okay.
With honey if you'd like, right? You can have a cup of water. You can have a cup of nabid. You can have a cup of honey water. You can have a cup of milk. So you don't, it doesn't have to be a feast. It could be very simple to eat. And you're expecting the barakah from Allah. So if you believe the hadith,
Hmm.
if you believe the ayat with all your heart, and you submit that I'm going to have barakah and energy in my day because I'm fulfilling the sunnah, and there's something immeasurable, something unseen that I can't tap into, that no doctor can understand, because it's something between me and Allah.
Hmm.
Now, how many of us will actually drink that sip of water asking Allah to give us strength in it? How many of us will say, Ya Allah, I'm only going to drink this sip of water. I don't have time to make food. Adhan is going to happen in 5 minutes. Ya
Right.
Allah, bless me with this water. Make it
Hmm.
enough for me to fulfill my duties in the day without exhaustion, without fatigue, without fainting. Asking Allah to put barakah in that drink. How many of us will actually do that? No, we'll
Right.
actually try to rush to get it from the food instead of asking the one who provides the food to give it to us.
Right.
And I can guarantee you that if you ate a table full of food, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes the blessing of
Hmm.
you feeling good from that food, no amount of food that you eat is going to make you feel good.
Right. Wow. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Amazing. Um.
So you asked the question, should they continue to eat like this after Ramadan?
Right.
If you eat 2 meals a day,
Hmm.
that's fine, but it's not to say you're not allowed to eat more after Ramadan. The most important thing is not the frequency of meals, it's the quantity of meal. So the portion size is more important than the frequency. So let's just say you have a very fast metabolism. Let's use the example of a man who works outdoors in the hard weather, and he's physically exhausting himself,
Hmm.
and he's out from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can't expect someone who's exerting that much energy to only consume food twice a day. So he might need more food to replenish the
Okay.
energy that he's lost. So he might eat at 6 a.m. He might eat again at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. But again, he might be eating an apple and peanut butter. He might be eating. It doesn't have to be steak, 6 times a day to suffice him just because he's burning energy.
Hmm.
So the amount of food that we eat and the frequency can change, and you have to pay attention to your own body and your own energies. Like what is it that you're going through? So a woman who's breastfeeding is going to need more food than someone who's not breastfeeding. And a child might need more food based on their growing, like depending on their age. If 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-old boys are going to eat like they're going to eat like horses, like they're going to
Of
eat
course.
constantly, and that's just because their body is growing at a really fast rate. So we can't have a blanket statement of how everybody should eat. It is very individualized.
Okay.
Uh, but I think the stomach tells you a lot. So if you're suffering from acid reflux, if you're suffering from bloating, if you're
Hmm.
suffering from GERD, if you have gastritis, if you have constipation, if you have IBS, if you're bloated, um, if you have any type of abdominal pains, if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, any of these things that show that there's an imbalance, this is your stomach telling you,
Hmm.
you need to slow it down. You need to cut
Right.
back on what you're doing. It's not working for me.
Right. And a good way to start in Ramadan, because I noticed, like, because we work full time, we're always sitting.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter what we eat, it actually impacts us negatively at times because we're not moving around as well.
Right.
Right.
So your stomach doesn't have its own muscles
Mhm.
to contract. It relies on that peristalsis, and it also relies on the abdominal muscles moving. So someone
Mm.
who's sitting doesn't get as thirsty or as hungry as someone who's moving, which is why I use the example of the guy who works outside in like cold weather. They're going to get hungrier because they're physically moving. And so their stomach is actually contracting more.
Mm.
Things get pushed out further. They're digesting more. They're burning more energy. The one who's sitting down isn't going to need the same food as the one who's physically active. But there should be a way that we should make sure we're being physically active 30 minutes a day. And even something as simple as, well, walk to the grocery store. There must be a grocery store near you that's a 10-minute walk,
Mhm.
right? Just
Yeah.
walk to the grocery store. Force yourself to go for a walk to the grocery store. Or, if you're doing tarawih, that's movement. You're going to be standing for about 30 minutes to an hour. Take a walk, go to the lake, get a stationary bike at home, do some type of physical movement every day.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can't just surrender and say, oh, well, I have a desk job, I don't have time, I'm busy. If whatever we don't invest in now to prevent disease,
Mhm.
we're going to be giving up all our time later to try to heal it,
Mm.
right?
So is that recommended as well, like the physical activity aspect during fasting? Or
100%.
okay.
100%. And so walking to the masjid is
Mm.
physical activity. Praying is physical activity. So Ramadan is actually in some ways beneficial. People do a lot more movement maybe in Ramadan. But the issue is if you've overburdened your stomach, if you filled it to the rim, then now your body is competing. So is it going to digest the food, or is it going to give you the physical energy to do the tarawih? Now there's a competition for energy. And
Mm.
so it's beneficial, more beneficial to eat light so that you have the ability to do two things at the same time.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, again, think of it as like a network of power. You can't give one room 1,000 watts and the other room 10 watts. That's like it's not a fair distribution of energy between two things that need it.
Mhm.
So your stomach requires a lot of blood to digest the food. So when you eat food, there's a huge rush of blood to the stomach in order to digest it. This loss of blood from other areas in your body makes you tired.
Okay.
So the bigger the meal is, the more energy that the stomach needs and heat and blood that the stomach needs to break it down, the more weak the entire body is going to feel. You're not going to have the mental capacity to work. You're not going to have the
Mm.
mental capacity to read Quran.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I find that same thing from personal experience. When I'm fasting, I'm more productive throughout the day. You know, I'm
Yes.
not focused on food. I'm focused on other things that I can kind of get.
Yes.
Even for work as well. Like I'm not thinking about food because I don't have to eat, right? Because I'm
Right.
fasting. So alhamdulillah, I find myself to be very, very productive.
But then we give it up as soon as Ramadan's done.
We have to go
And
back to our 3 meals, 4 meals.
right.
Or
But
not.
if we were to fast the 3 white days of every month, it keeps the nafs disciplined.
Okay.
If you were to fast the Mondays and Thursdays, you discipline your nafs a little bit more. So the bare minimum after Ramadan is that you do at least the 3 white days every month.
Okay.
That's a bare minimum. Now, if you want to do better, then you do the 3 white days and the Mondays and Thursdays.
Okay.
And then you would do all the sunnahs. So there's like 6 in Shawwal. There's like the days of Dhul Hijjah. There's a few other days of fasting. I
Right.
actually calculated it. I said if somebody was to fast all the 3 white days and all the Mondays and Thursdays and all the additional sunnah days, how many days a year do you think that is of fasting?
40?
40? 170.
Oh, wow.
And an Islamic year is 355 days. So that's a little bit less than half the year would be
Close to
fasting.
half. Yeah.
If we were to fulfill all the sunnah fasts, half the year we would be fasting.
Wow. SubhanAllah. I mean, imagine the impact.
Of course, your energy level is going to be different. Your taqwa is going to be different. Your relationship to Allah is going to be different. We cannot allow ourselves to be enslaved to our stomach. We really, I mean, if you do anything this Ramadan, it's like really break free from that. And I know people get concerned. They're like, well, I can't make my husband eat like this. I can't make my kids eat like this. I always say, start with you. Begin with yourself, because when you light your own candle, other people start to see the light, right? But you have to begin somewhere. We can't just say, well, someone else is not doing it. Yeah, you just do it for yourself. Just you only have to worry about you.
Okay. Start from you, basically.
100%.
And what would you give advice to our younger crowd, you know, right before Taraweeh and after Taraweeh, they got to get their ice cap, their energy drinks, you know? How do you kind of tackle that and how do you get away from that? And what are some of the alternatives?
So the thing is that uh, the younger crowd are hard because they're in this phase where they sort of have to figure it out themselves.
Okay.
Right. And I mean, look at us. I'm 48. It took me up until this point to sort of learn this information. When I lead my children by example, I show them the right way. I do it for myself. Whether or not they follow through is going to be up to them. But I tell them. So when my kids have a stomach issue and they ate XYZ, I will make sure I make the connection back. Well, you know, your stomach is hurting because you did this and this and that, and that wasn't good for your stomach. So I start to connect the dots for them, but they
Nice.
ultimately have to make the decision themselves.
Okay, very nice. Um, okay, I was gonna ask something I totally forgot. Um,
So we do have a few questions from the audience, so I can
Okay.
ask those here.
sure.
So before I do that, inshallah, let me just get up sister's website and information. I've been displaying it on the screen throughout. Let me just bring it up on the screen here. So this is, if you can just tell us your website and Instagram handle and what kind of information folks can find there, how do they connect with you, and some of the things, inshallah, you have coming up that people should watch out for.
So one of the things they can do is they can go to my website, propheticmedicine.com. And on my site, there's things on my blog. There's some recipes on my blog. I have a lot of I have two courses that I teach. I teach one that really is like teaching you the foundation of Islamic medicine, like how does the body work according to Islamic medicine, and
Mm.
comparing it with Western medicine, differentiating between prophetic medicine and Islamic medicine. So I teach one course on really understanding our health from an Islamic perspective. I teach another class called Living by Design, and it's a 12-month mentorship program. And so what I do is every 2 weeks, I have a class with my students. And in this class, I really reintroduce them to food from an Islamic perspective. And I use, there's the ayat of the Quran that all talk about food. I use them, the hadiths about food. I teach them about herbs when it comes to like the prophetic herbs versus Islamic herbs, because there's a distinction. There's a lot of misinformation on social media. Like people will tell you that ginger is a prophetic food.
Mm, okay.
Well, ginger is not a prophetic food. It's not.
Okay.
It's not. And I think people are shocked because everyone always uses the ayah. Ginger is mentioned in reference to a drink that we will have in Jannah that's mixed with ginger.
Okay.
But not everything that's in Jannah for us is something that we could just translate into using in the dunya. The first food that we'll eat in Jannah is the liver of a whale. Should we all go and slaughter whales now because it's a Jannah food? No.
Mm.
We will have non-intoxicating wine in Jannah. Does that mean we should start having non-intoxicating wine here? No.
Mm.
We can't compare the food of Jannah to the foods of the dunya. When something is a prophetic dish, it's something that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ate himself.
Mhm.
So if he ate squash, then we say squash is a prophetic food.
Mm.
We can't call potatoes a prophetic food because they didn't have potatoes at their time. Right? So it's we really have to, I think we have to go back to really understanding Islam and food from the Qur'an and Sunnah, and not from these online clickbait messages that people want you, just because
Mhm.
there's a lot of this concept of superfood is really just to push agendas. I mean, the non-Muslims do it, and unfortunately the Muslims have picked up on this habit, and they do it so that they can get people interested in something. It's just like, well, no, go back to the actual source
Mhm.
and give correct information, because at the end of the day we could be harming each other more than helping each other.
Right.
I do have a YouTube channel.
Okay.
So if someone was to go to YouTube at symbol nurasunna, they will be able to find a lot of webinars that I've got, previous Ramadan webinars on how to own your health, women's health. There's a lot on my YouTube channel that I have. I try to do about one webinar a month. So if anyone's registered to my mailing list,
Mm.
they might get free downloads. They might get invitations to my webinars. I also do coaching sessions, one-on-one health coaching sessions, but I'm
Okay.
going to be phasing that out just because it's a huge, like it takes 90 minutes per person. And
Mhm.
so there's a huge demand for that. And it's a little bit overwhelming to manage all the like questions that I get for
Mhm.
individual health. But I do offer health coaching sessions as well to help individuals who are trying to readjust their diet and to get back on track with their health. But I really think that the courses are going to be a lot better because they kind of train you how to do that as opposed to depending on me, which is why I've created those programs. I really want people to be independent. They acquire the knowledge, they learn how to implement it, they implement it on their family and friends and their children. That's really the best way.
Okay. Just shifting our gears a little bit here. So when we talked about food, obviously, and the impact of food, negative and positive. And during Ramadan, one of the things that we struggle with is also sleep.
Yes.
So how do we really like tackle that? Because obviously, like for most of us, you're up, you have your suhoor, you go for prayers, and you start your work, and you get right into your day.
So similar to the concept of food, the concept of sleep from Islam is completely different.
Okay.
And now if you believe that you need 8 hours of sleep and you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, you're automatically going to feel tired,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
because the belief is I need 8 hours of sleep, which is incorrect. From an Islamic perspective, we don't need that much sleep. You can actually probably run on 4 to 6 hours of sleep,
Okay.
and it could be broken sleep. And
Also, not like straight
it
one.
doesn't even have to be straight.
Ah.
So
okay.
it actually, if you went back like to traditional, what they would do is they would fall asleep at Isha. So they would pray their Isha, they'd fall asleep. They'd wake up in the middle of their night. They would do Qiyam. They would work. They would do other things. They'd go back to sleep until Fajr. And then they'd get up for Fajr. They'd pray, and then they'd start their day. Islam tells you when you should sleep and when you shouldn't. So immediately after Fajr, It's not recommended to sleep after Fajr. It actually has a name in Arabic. It's called Haylula,
Okay.
which means it puts a barrier between you and your risk. So sleeping immediately after Fajr creates a barrier between you and your risk. So it's not actually recommended to sleep at this time.
Mhm.
Qaylula, which is around Salatul Dhuhr time, this is when you're recommended to sleep. It actually says that those who don't sleep are like the devils.
Oh my goodness.
So we are actually advised as to when to sleep
Mm.
and when not to sleep. And we're not allowed to sleep after Asr either. Because after Asr, what's the third word? Qaylula? Haylula. So Kailula, Ailula. Ailula is the one after Asr. So after
Okay.
Asr, Ailula is the one that would actually make you feel sick. Like
Oh.
so there's different times of day where you are supposed to sleep, not supposed to sleep. The sleep of the night, you don't need a lot. And our sleep needs changes according to the seasons as well. So you'll notice the winter, the nights are longer, your body needs more sleep. It's
Okay.
colder, it's more difficult on the body, so your body needs to conserve more energy, it sleeps. In the summer, the days are longer, the nights are shorter. We get a lot of energy from the sun, so our requirement for sleep at night is actually less. Most people who live in a village, they'll wake up naturally with the sun. You know, just before Fajr, their body already starts to wake up. The sounds of the birds, because they live in a natural environment, and as soon as sunset happens, their body, the melatonin starts to kick in. Like all of these things are connected to the sun. Our body naturally gets tired and wants to sleep.
Mhm.
So the belief that we need X amount of sleep and we're feeling tired in Ramadan because we're not getting that sleep, it all begins in the mind first. So if this is going to be your belief, no matter how much sleep you get, you're going to be tired.
Mashallah.
But if you change the perspective that I don't need this much sleep, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in my sleep. I'm going to follow the sunnah according to sleep. The other issue is the more heavier we eat, the more we need to sleep. So
Okay.
if you're not eating properly, you're going to be creating a burden on your body that requires it to sleep in order to break that down. So how much food you eat is going to affect how much sleep you need. So the less you eat, the less sleep you'll need. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah.
And so if people are having heavy meals at iftar and then heavy meals after tarawih, they're not going to be able to get up for suhoor. They're not going to be able to have an efficient day the next day
Because they need the sleep.
because their body
order
needs the sleep
to-
to digest, because the system is overburdened with the food,
Right.
which is why you have so much energy when you're fasting.
Oh yeah.
You have so much energy when you're fasting.
Alhamdulillah, so much.
It's
I
just
love it.
we actually damage it ourselves with what we do.
I think it's just so hard to break away from the cultural barriers. And I know you said that it's really starts from you. It's hard when you live with parents a little bit, right? You can start that, but they're always telling you like, yeah, but we did that and we're fine.
Right, but this is the same as if you're starting to practice. If you're starting to practice your deen, your family doesn't practice, and you're starting to put hijab, or you're starting to wear abaya, or you're
Okay.
starting to do tajweed, or any of these things. Anything that you do that comes closer to Allah is going to create a little bit of a, ruffle some feathers around you, because it makes people feel like, oh, what are you saying? I'm not doing well enough? That I'm not a good Muslim because I don't do this, right? So this is a natural part. You have to just do it for yourself. Like, this is your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You kind of have to shut out, whether it's your husband, kids, anybody else. You should say, this is my path to Allah. I'm not harming anyone if I eat less. I'm not imposing my diet on anyone else. I'm fulfilling it for myself. But you're going to find the strength the more you go back to the Quran, because the more you read these ayat every single day and you're connecting to Allah, it reinforces what you're trying to do.
Okay.
If we're not close to the Quran, any mission that we try to do closer to Allah will be difficult. So really, that rope of strength comes from the Quran. So if we want to increase in inner strength, you have to be taking more doses of the Quran in your day.
Inshallah, subhanallah. So how do we keep this momentum going?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again encourages you to fast the 6 white days of Shawwal.
Okay.
So beginning the Quran routine in Ramadan, if you can allot for yourself in your day 30 minutes to an hour of Quran each day, habits form within 3 weeks. So Ramadan is 4
Right.
weeks. If you do something consistently for 3 weeks, it becomes difficult to break it. You just have to want to. You have to want to make this transformation in your life. There was a point in time in my own life where I was reading Quran every day, but I had made this like notion in my head, oh, I just have to read anything. I could read an ayah, I could read 3 ayat, I could read 3 pages. I just have to give the Quran a portion of my time. I did. And it was like that for maybe 1 or 2 years. And I finally finished the Quran that way after reading it at like 1 or 2 ayat a night. And I thought, wow, wait a minute. Well, why am I just giving it whatever is available of my time? Why don't I actually dedicate time to the Quran? And you find that when you start to give the Quran a portion of your day, your entire day's barakah changes.
Sure.
So you dedicate 30 minutes a night to your Quran.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how tired you are. You dedicate 30 minutes, you're going to find that you're going to read a lot more Quran. You're going to have a lot more barakah in your day. Things will start realigning in your life. And then it becomes almost like an addictive drug. Like you're going to be afraid to give it up. Your health will get better. Your wealth will get better. Your relationship will get better. This becomes something that you want to sustain beyond that. And then, so alhamdulillah, for me, I developed the habit that every night after, whether it was Ramadan or not, every night I read before bed. And then that's the same with fasting. You know, you can continue to fast the 3 white days. You just have to make the choice that this is going to be who I am. Doesn't matter what anything around you is happening. You just have to make that decision.
Right. So, alhamdulillah, you have such a good relationship with food, you know, from the Sunnah perspective. And, you know, I feel like a lot of times it comes from like some kind of trigger. As you said, I heard your last episode from the other, from the podcast, and you talked about your sensitivity to certain foods, and that led you to do this research and to kind of find this knowledge for yourself. And I find that a lot of times, if we're not going through anything, you know, we feel perfectly fine. We don't feel the need to invest and to make the change, right? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right. And
just some kind of, do we need some kind of trigger? Do we need some kind of a starting point to kind of push us to? A lot of times that's what it is, right?
Yes.
That you don't really do anything unless you feel a certain way.
so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us calamities. And I think Ibn al-Qayyim calls it bitter medicine, so that he can heal whatever is internally wrong with us, like spiritually. We're not talking just physically.
Okay.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he gave me the allergy to peppers, it was a very painful thing to go through. Physically, I felt like I was dying. I could no longer eat foods. I was having reactions 4 or 5 times a week. Like even doctors said, you can't take an EpiPen 5 times a week. Like you can't do that. Like you have to find a way to avoid your allergen. So I really stopped eating. I stopped eating at people's houses. I would take food with me in a Tupperware. My entire relationship to food had to change. And food is the pleasure of life, right? Everybody loves food. It's like our social events are around it. We, you know, everything is always surrounding food. People love food, and it's a pleasure that makes you feel good. So when you lose that, there was a period where I was like falling into depression. And I thought, well, I can't live like this. You know, like I hate eating with people. I don't want to eat with family. I don't want to go see with friends. I don't want to go to people's houses. I don't want to eat. I was afraid of food. I didn't like the feeling like I was dying all the time.
Of course, yeah.
And it was there that I found that through knowledge, through seeking knowledge, through reading hadiths, through reading more Quran, through implementing sunnahs, I discovered black seed as a healer, like as a herbal medicine. And then black seed made me curious. Well, if black seed can heal us, what else did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create that can heal us? So then I took interest in herbal medicine. And then from there, it's just like, well, what else do I need to know about the human body? How does this work? How does this affect it? So it really opened up this huge pathway for me to seek knowledge. And when I look back now, I mean, it's been 11 years, and I actually became allergic to peppers in Ramadan. So it's like 11 years this Ramadan since I became allergic to peppers. And I can tell you that, yes, that calamity was a huge blessing in my life. But how we respond to the calamity is going to make the difference, right? Now, we don't need calamities to turn back to Allah. Allah uses them when we don't, but we don't need that, because we are told that you can have shukr and gratitude to Allah and obedience to Allah even when you don't have these calamities. We don't have to wait. We just have to, like, I think if people started to read the Quran just because it's something that they want to connect back to Allah, that's going to be enough to change their perception of life. That one thing that you do, just reading the Quran, your perception on food will change. Your perception on sleep will change. Your perception on relationships will change. Your perception of diseases, all the things that we chase after in this dunya to make our lives easier, all of that will change once you forge that relationship to the Quran. And you don't have to wait for calamity before we do that, right? We don't have to wait until our lives are falling apart before we go back to Allah.
Unfortunately, that's usually what happens when you go through something negative, is when you're like, oh, I gotta make a change in my life for this and this reason, and you go back to Allah, right? For most of people. But again, I guess, like, when you make dua to Allah for guidance for a lot of things, I think that we should incorporate this as well into our dua to make us people who actually follow the right diet,
Yes.
right, and follow the sunnah way of eating.
Yes.
I think that's very important. Like maybe start with the dua this Ramadan to sort of, in part of your duas, whatever your duas are for Ramadan, maybe add this as well.
There's a few du'as in the Sunnah that are pertaining to food,
Okay.
health. So there's du'as where you're thanking Allah for the foods that He's given you with, because not everybody gets the food that we get. The access to foods that we get is a blessing that most people don't have around the world.
Right.
There's also a dua, and if you were to do like the morning and evening ifkars, like the Husn al-Muslim, the little fortress of a Muslim booklets, or the apps that have these, you'll find a lot of duas. There's dua for like asking Allah to give you afia in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking afia for your body, for your eyes, for your hearing. So you're asking Allah to protect these faculties. There's also a dua that says you ask Allah for protection from 4 things. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min nafsin la min Allahumma inni a'udhu bika. Well, nafsin la tashba' is one of them. Du'a la yusma'.
Okay.
Min qalbin la yakhsha. I forgot the other one. But Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min nafsin la tashba' is I'm seeking refuge in Allah to protect me from a nafs that's not fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we were to make these du'as, then obviously it's going to help give us that strength. So if we all, whatever it is that you're feeling weakness in, like I'm feeling weakness, I'm not trusting that I'm going to get enough sleep. I'm not trusting that I'm going to feel energized. I'm not trusting that I can present food to guests and they're going to be happy with me. If every time you have that fear that you're not going to be able to do it, then you have to go back to the source that's going to give you the strength, which is Allah. And you do that through dua, and even just conversation as you're cooking. Allah, make the food good, let them like it,
Yeah.
let this be a good experience, let this be something that revives the sunnah. Just always engage your heart with Allah.
And during Ramadan, I find it's very difficult because there's a lot of different restaurants offering suhoor. You want to experience that, aspect of Ramadan.
Yes.
Because that's only offered during that. Because, obviously food has evolved over time. There's amazing food out there nowadays.
Yes.
Like, how do you get away? Like, I want to, like, as a foodie especially, you want to experience all different kinds of things that you can. And living in Canada, obviously,
Yes.
it allows us to experience food from all sorts of different cultures.
And I think that term foodie is a dangerous term.
It is.
Because when you say I'm a foodie, that means my nafs is big, right? And we are taught to discipline the nafs.
Right.
So if we're supposed to discipline the nafs in the month of Ramadan to attain taqwa, then it does counter, like, again, we go back to the whole idea of israf. You're going to go to a restaurant, they're going to serve you a table food, a feast. The feast is supposed to be Eid, right? It's not supposed to be the every day in Ramadan that you're feasting.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to have that feast, not at suhoor, going to fancy restaurants that offer you a fancy suhoor. It takes away from the essence of Ramadan. And to abstain from that, you really have to kind of protect your eyes. Don't look at all the posts about food. Don't look at all the things that the restaurants are offering.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that desire is there, we don't fulfill it. And if you want to create one day that you do just for the heck of it,
Mm-hmm.
yes, but again, it's an insatiable beast. You give it once and your body's going to say, I want that again.
I want that again.
I want that again. But your job is in Ramadan to discipline your nafs. If you're using Ramadan as an opportunity to taste all the fancy foods and all the restaurants, and there was waste at every meal, you're going to be asked about that.
Mm.
You're going to be asked, and we can't think that it's not going to impact our fast. It's not going to impact our health. It's not going to impact our relationship to Allah.
Mm-hmm.
And how are we also teaching the future generation? Are we teaching our children that Ramadan is all about feasting? Because we're supposed to be teaching them that Ramadan is all about taqwa.
Right.
Right? So if our focus is, if our nafs is so big that it only desires food, we are going to create a future generation that has an even bigger foodie nafs.
Mm.
Right? But if you make the month of Ramadan about like, hey, let's sit down and read the Quran, looking for the ayat that talk about food. What can we learn this month together? Like, so again, it's where you want to invest your time. You're going to reap the seeds, the harvest of what you invest, right?
Mm-hmm. So, Brother Kashif, do you have any questions for us from the audience?
Yes, inshallah, we have a few that are queued up. So we have Dr. Rashid watching. So he has a comment here. I agree with the long-term plan for a healthy lifestyle. Health cannot be outsourced. The food industry shows its preference towards shelf life versus human life.
100%.
So yes, we appreciate Dr. Rashid who is always supporting us and mashallah watching and with the comments. So we had a few questions coming from Instagram here. So we touched upon it. You were just touching upon it a little bit, but is fasting 30 days. Okay, is fasting 30 days and then going all out on Eid bad for you? What should eating on Eid look like? I guess after 30 days of Ramadan.
So Eid is supposed to be a day of celebration. So if you have one day of celebration where you overeat, it's not haram. So it's not haram to occasionally overeat. To occasionally eat your fill is not haram. It's that consistency that's going to damage you.
Mm.
So it's the day of celebration. There's going to be foods. There's going to be feasting. This is the whole purpose of Eid al-Fitr. It's a celebration for us,
Mm.
right? So we don't say we're not allowed to fast on Eid. So on that day, yes,
Right.
enjoy the food, celebrate. So when you abstain from feasting all of Ramadan, that day of Eid has so much more value in your heart. If your
Mm.
children didn't go out to restaurants and feast in Ramadan at Sahur and Iftar, that day of feasting is going to mean so much more. But when we do it every day in Ramadan, Eid doesn't really have any value. It's like, well, I ate like that throughout the whole month,
Right.
right? So there's no issues with, it's not going to break the health effects. Like one day of not eating properly isn't going to outweigh 30 days of eating well.
Okay.
It's more about the consistent daily habits that we do, and not the one day a week or one day a month that we abuse ourselves. And overeating occasionally is not haram. It's something that we can do from time to time. It's just you don't want to be doing it at every single meal every single day.
Okay, so it's okay to break away from that, but once in a while.
Once in a while. So like I said, if you wanted to do the let's have an iftar dinner at a restaurant and see what the meals are like,
Right.
because you want to enjoy it, to do that occasionally is fine. To do that every night is not.
Mhm.
So if you made it okay, we just do it on a Friday night, or we just do it once a week, that's not going to break the discipline that you're building.
Right.
Just so long as you don't allow it to become something that you're constantly creating at home or in restaurants.
Mm. Okay, Jazakallah. And I know you talked a little bit about, just wanted to touch base on that. I know for Sahur, we talked about, just having water, it's sufficient, alhamdulillah, from the Sunnah perspective. But what about for Iftar? What is sufficient, or what is something that we should kind of look at for our Iftar plate?
So with iftar, the first thing that we're supposed to break our meal with is actually dates. And you would think that you're fasting all day, you're very thirsty, you're dehydrated. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't say guzzle down 2 cups of water. He said break your fast with dates. And the reason for that is dates are glucose, and our body runs on glucose. So
Right.
we take our fuel and energy from glucose first. The majority of our foods are supposed to have glucose in them, carbohydrates. So when we break our fast, you want to make sure that you break it with the dates first, because that immediately stops your body from continuing the starvation and
Okay.
thirst and like feeling thirsty. So that immediately stops the ketosis that's been burning fat and calories. It starts to open up your stomach to wanting to accept more foods. And again, keep in mind that your stomach hasn't eaten all day, and it
Right.
needs to be slowly warmed up again. So when you eat the dates first, it slowly reignites the stomach to kick into action. That sugar in the system is actually what's going to help.
Mm.
And then the hadith says that if you don't have dates, you do a sip of water.
Okay.
After that, you can eat. You eat your meal. The most important thing is that you're eating a portion that's equivalent to a bowl.
Mm.
So if you have a bowl of food, you can have rice, you can have meat, you can have broccoli, you can have uh, whatever. You can have a samosa, whatever you can fit in that bowl. Go ahead and eat it.
Okay.
There's just the maximum is it can't be more than that. It can't be a huge plate and then another huge plate until you're like feeling like you can't breathe, that you're so full of food.
What about like a bowl? But then let's say after Tarawih, you have another.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
You can.
okay.
Yes, 100%. So
Mm.
long as the food has left the stomach and that hunger has kicked in again and your stomach is rumbling for food, then you can go ahead and eat again another bowl.
Mm.
The only advice I have is don't eat a heavy meal the second time. So if you
Okay.
have a heavy meal, keep it at the iftar. The second meal shouldn't be the heavy meal, because you're about to sleep right after tarawih.
Right.
And your stomach should not be digesting food while you sleep. Otherwise, you're going to end up with acid reflux. You're going to get
Right.
GERD. You're going to get, acid splashing up to your throat. People will end up with acid in their lungs and can get coughs. There's a lot that can happen if you eat and sleep. So if you're going to eat something light before bed, it would be like toast and butter or dates and butter or a cup of milk, something
Okay.
light to nourish you, but that wouldn't take 3 hours to leave your stomach.
Okay. Great.
Make sense?
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khair. We have some comments coming in. Alhamdulillah, I make dua all the time when cooking. Make it a means of goodness for all those who partake in this food. Ameen. And she continues to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to eat less, talk less, and sleep less too.
Yes.
Definitely.
So we have a question. So we were talking about just water right now. There was a question related to water. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. How much water and when to have water during Ramadan? I think 4 to 5 I drink 4 to 5 liters daily when not fasting. So one thing, sorry, I always like to say before the questions is obviously this is a podcast and we can give general advice, but there might be case by case, like you were saying that there's not one meal for everyone, right?
Right.
So so inshallah we'll let the sister Iman answer with some advice, but we encourage everyone that has more specific questions to also contact her. We've been sharing her the details, inshallah. So yes, regarding water, how much and when.
So if we go back to the sunnah of water, the hadith says that we're supposed to take water in sips. So it's not easy to drink a liter of water before suhoor. It's not easy to drink 3 cups of water before suhoor if you're doing it through sips. If you're drinking the way the prophetic sunnah is advising you to do it, which is the best for your stomach and digestion, you should be sipping water. 4 to 5 liters a day is a lot. And there is such a thing called water intoxication, which could kill you, where you create an imbalance with how much water your body is getting in one time. So if you drank 2 liters of water within 1 hour, you could kill yourself.
Wow.
With water.
Amazing.
Because you change the salt levels, you change your the balance in your bloodstream with the amount of water that you're flooding in.
Right.
So sipping water is what you need to do. You can drink water before suhoor. If you're drinking water, you want to do it in sips. So if you want to drink 3 cups of water at suhoor time, you might need an hour to do that, because it's not possible to drink 3 cups of water in 10 minutes unless you're chugging it, which is not going to be good for you.
Right.
It also depends on your physical activity. If the guy is at the gym, he's working out, he's training other people all day, he spends working out, it's hot, or he's working outside in construction and it's hot summer days, then they're going to need more water than someone who is sitting at home on a computer at a desk in the winter, right? Like, it's just, your body is going to need more water or less water. You don't want to have water at the same time that you're having food, especially not large quantities of water. So if you have your iftar, you're going to be sipping water or sipping a herbal tea to rehydrate yourself. Once your stomach has had at least 2 hours, like, you can continue sipping water. If you want to drink a larger portion of water, then give your stomach time to at least have processed the food. Water also waters down your digestive juices. So your stomach acid is going to become weaker if you have 3 cups of water with your meal. Then it won't be able to digest the meat that you just ate. It's not going to extract the nutrients. You're not going to benefit from that meal. And it's going to sit and make you feel sick. So how much water we consume is very important. It is dependent on their activities. But again, the more we stick to the sunnah, that water is to be sipped and not guzzled, the healthier you're going to be.
So more is not always good.
Now, that's the law of diminishing returns,
Right.
right? If you do more, you can cause a lot more harm. So drinking more water than your body needs within a short period of time can cause death. Like water. I mean, it blows my mind.
Right.
Because everyone
Scary.
thinks water is life and water is, pure and there's nothing harmful. There's no calories. I could drink as much water as I want. But no, you can really mess up your internal system by giving it more than what it needs.
So sipping throughout the day really helps.
Sipping throughout the evening because you're fasting.
Right.
Yeah.
During
Sipping throughout
fasting.
the evening is a lot more beneficial than drinking 2 cups in one shot.
Okay.
Jazakallah khair. So we had a question here. Do sahur and iftar look different in summer and winter months? And also, if you're in North America, you're also going through a time change this year.
Yes.
In
Yes.
the midst of
During,
Ramadan. Does that factor in at all? Or
So the sunnah of eating, if you were to live according to the way that we're designed, you would be eating the foods that grow in the winter. You would be eating the foods that grow in the summer. This concept that you can cross the street, get to a grocery store, pick up a watermelon and bring it home in Ramadan and it's like freezing cold outside is unnatural. And it's not healthy because watermelon is cooling,
Right.
it's hydrating, but outside it's cold and freezing. So it doesn't really suit that environment. You want to try to stick to the foods that would typically grow in your environment or within a surrounding area. Like, you can get imports, but they have to be from your local environment. If you're getting imports that are like from the tropics and you're at minus 17 outside, you are going to cause discomfort in your digestive system. You're going to cause imbalances in your health just by eating out of season.
Wow.
So the more you eat in season, the better it is for you. So suhoor and iftar in the summer would be very different than in the winter. There are some things that would be considered general. So you could have milk all year round. You can have dates all year round. You can obviously have water all year round. But you wouldn't have watermelon out of season. you wouldn't have, for instance, um, oranges grow in the winter.
Okay.
So it's not really advisable to have it in the summer,
Okay.
right? So there are certain things that you should be adjusting according to the season.
Okay. So I guess it's important to really know what's the seasonal food, right? I
Right.
think that's a starting point for most
Well,
of
the
us.
more you're in tune to your body, the more you're in tune to how things grow, the more you're in tune to your environment and the climate, the more your health is going to shift.
Mm.
Because we're not in silos. We don't like just live in a silo all by ourselves. We're connected to the sun, we're connected to daylight, we're connected to the wind. People get migraines from wind. People's health is affected by the weather outside. People who are
Right.
asthmatic, when it rains, they have asthmatic attacks, or they might get more congestion in their lungs. So we are connected to our environment. We're connected to the foods that grow in that environment. We're connected to the people in our environment.
Right. Subhanallah.
Jazakallah khair. So we have a question coming in on I don't want to put you on the spot because obviously I encourage people to check with religious scholars also. But in case you do have any information, so are these highly recommended sunnahs? And they're asking about drinking and eating sitting down and drinking a glass of water with 2 pauses to breathe.
So yes, you are supposed to drink with pauses. So that's the sipping. You take you drink, you take a breath, you drink, you take a breath, you drink, you take a breath. You're supposed to do it in 3. You should be sitting down. Yes, there are difference of opinion as to whether or not you could drink water standing or not.
Okay.
I think for the sake of what we're trying to achieve here, those are minute details that isn't going to make or break it. So if there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars, whether you drink standing up or sitting down, isn't going to make or break it, right? If the scholars differ, then we can differ and like doing it as well.
Okay.
Drinking a glass of water, yeah. So you're supposed to take the gaps in it. What was the other question?
I think that was it.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's so someone's just asking on the Instagram streams. Someone is asking a follow up about, you mentioned the eating for the seasons, according to the seasons.
Yes.
So they're asking, are you talking specifically about Ramadan or just in general?
No, this is all year round. You are supposed to eat according to the season. And the thing is that it's not actually natural for us to eat outside of the season. Because of the industrialization that we've gone through, the past 150 years, we now have refrigeration. They didn't have that before.
Right.
We now have canned foods. They didn't have that at the time of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They didn't even have potatoes at the time of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Potatoes didn't exist in Europe and in the Middle East until I think the 1600s.
Oh.
So it was not even available to them. This is because we've moved food from one part of the world to the other part and
Right.
started cultivating, right? It is better to eat what is seasonal. And there is obviously a lot of evidence in that in the Qur'an and Sunnah. There's one particular ayah that I can think of where Zakaria alayhi salam enters into Maryam alayhi salam's mihrab. And he looks at the food that she's eating and he says, where did you get this from? Because she was eating winter fruits in the summer and summer fruits in the winter. And so this was so unusual for them that he asked her, where did you get this from? And she said, this is from Allah. So it's not to say it's haram to eat watermelon in the winter. No, we're not saying it's haram. You're allowed to eat whatever Allah has blessed you with. However, when you're eating against what's natural in your environment, it's going to have an impact on your health. So again, when we indulge once, if my kids really crave, my kids crave watermelon, I don't buy it for them. I'm really stubborn when it comes to that. My kids will go through a grocery store, but please, mama. And I'm like, absolutely not. Because I know they're going to get respiratory issues. They're going to develop more colds and flus. It's cold and damp. It's going to affect them. I understand it. And I'm not going to let them fulfill their nafs. I'm like, nope, you can have other fruits. There's other winter fruits that you could eat. You can have oranges, clementines, grapefruits. There's other things that grow in the winter, persimmons. Yeah. So I give them the options that are better for their health. Does that answer it?
Yes, it does. Jazakallah khair. So we had a question come in here. Sorry, just looking for it. Okay, so last time you talked about honey.
Yes.
Where and how should this fit into the Ramadan routine?
So honey should be part of I would eat it at Sahur. So if I was going to have Sahur, it might be a piece of sourdough bread or pita bread or some type of good quality breads, not ones with 30 ingredients. Okay. So good quality breads, homemade bread if you can. I would eat it with grass-fed butter and I would have some honey with it, and that would be a breakfast.
Okay.
So try to incorporate honey. You can also have a teaspoon of honey before bed. So if you're feeling hungry, you didn't want to eat, you can have a teaspoon of honey. Honey should be eaten, I would say, like you can have a teaspoon in the morning, teaspoon at night in Ramadan, definitely, because it's going to help your gut flora. It's also going to energize you. I also recommend honey water for anybody who's facing constipation. So fasting is cooling and drying. It really reduces the amount of heat in our system because we're losing fluids because of that dehydration that we're supposed to go through for the detox. We experience constipation with Ramadan, and then you're eating these heavy meals and your stomach acid is, your stomach hasn't been working all day. So then people will eat their meals and then they're uncomfortable. They end up with constipation. By drinking honey water, you hydrate and you allow your body to have like a mild laxative so that you're not constipated. So people, instead of drinking just pure water in the morning, you can have a cup of honey water in the morning as part of your suhoor, and that's going to actually prevent you from becoming constipated.
So honey water.
Yeah, it's just a tablespoon of honey into a cup of water, and you're supposed to let it sit from the night before
Okay.
because it needs to, the water has to break down the honey so that it can kind of like emulsify with the water.
Like a room temperature water.
Room temperature water. I leave it on the countertop. I just cover it. I put a tablespoon in a cup of water, cover it. Now, if you don't want to do honey water, you can also do dates. So you could take a quarter cup of dates into 1 or 2 cups of water, cover it, leave it overnight.
Okay.
Then the next morning you strain it and you drink that. And that's also a way of keeping your system hydrated.
Oh, good to know.
And you wouldn't end up with constipation.
Wow.
Right.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, I was just checking the Instagram stream. There was a question here. Thoughts on coffee during Ramadan and in general outside of Ramadan too?
So to me, coffee is a herb. Just the way tea is, just the way chamomile is. It's a herb and it's permissible. There's nothing wrong with it. There's some medicinal benefits to coffee. How much we take coffee and the frequency of coffee is going to affect us. A lot of people are going to end up with headaches when they break free from caffeine in Ramadan.
Yeah.
So I always say, just be careful as to how much you want to put back in your life. I know people who will wake up early at Sahur just to have their coffee so that they don't go through the headaches. It's because they can't handle the withdrawals. I don't think any of us should be that addicted to food. I don't think it's healthy for any of us to be addicted to any kind of food. There's nothing, even black seed. I tell people, don't take black seed every day. You should not be taking anything every day for life.
So just in moderation.
In moderation, take it when you need it. So to have a cup of coffee, great. This is not bad. It could actually have a lot of health benefits for you. But to allow your body to become dependent on coffee, that you can't have a bowel movement without coffee, or you'll get headaches without coffee. This is your body telling you it has an addiction. And Ramadan is a time to break the addiction, right?
Yeah.
So yes, they can have coffee. Coffee is also cooling and drying. So it's a diuretic. It's going to flush out a lot more fluid. So if you're already dehydrated from fasting and you're already experiencing headaches and constipation, drinking 2 or 3 cups of coffee at night is not only going to disturb your sleep, it's also going to disturb your fluid levels in your body. So my recommendation is to have less coffee in Ramadan. And like coffee should be 1 or 2 cups a day in general outside of Ramadan. It should not be 4 to 6 cups.
Okay.
Right? It's still a herb. It's still going to have an effect on the system. It's going to dry you out. It's like 1 to 2 cups a day outside of Ramadan. If you have to in Ramadan, do it once a day. And probably do it at Sahur, since you're going to have to stay up after Sahur. Don't do it at night when you should be getting your body ready for sleep. Don't take caffeine after sunset.
Jazakallah khair. I think we'll stop the questions there. If there's any more, we've been sharing the contact information. Inshallah, you can reach out to Sister Iman. Ruj, Sister Ruj, I'll pass it back to you to wrap up. MashaAllah, your first time hosting. Great job. And when will we see you back in the chair again?
Oh yeah, for sure. Inshallah, why not?
Inshallah.
But Jazakallah khair, Sister Iman, for coming back and sharing some wealth of knowledge with us. And as I said, there's a lot of information out there. For me, starting point would be to going to your site, because I think, mashallah, you share so much good knowledge that we can definitely, benefit in Ramadan, but also outside of Ramadan. Right? So Jazakallah khair for that. But before we wrap up, can you give us one advice for Ramadan that we can take back from all this information that you, mashallah, provided to us?
So one advice that I'd like to leave everybody with for Ramadan is to read the Quran and to read it in search of food, because I think it'll change their perspective on their food throughout the year when they start to develop this relationship to the Quran in Ramadan. So because you're hungry, you're thinking about food, read the Quran in search of the ayat for food. And when you get to these ayat, really start to do tadabbur, like stop and think about it. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying here? Why did he point this food out here? I've never noticed this before. And so I've read the Quran cover to cover several times, a few times. And I can tell you that there are still ayat about food that pop up there. I'm like, wow, why didn't I ever see this before? So if you were to do anything today in Ramadan that's going to change your relationship to food. It's going to be by investing in your relationship to the Quran, because it's going to change your perspective of food. It's going to change your perspective with your relationship to Allah. It's going to open up a whole new world that you haven't experienced before. So that would be the one piece of advice. It's a month of fasting. It's a month of taqwa. It's the month of the Quran. Use that hunger that you're feeling inside to search for the ayat about food.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. And Jazakallah khair for our audience for joining us today live from Masjid Darul Imam. And inshallah, we'll see you next week and Sunday, 11 a.m. Ramadan Mubarak to everybody.